Menelaus tried for Lysimachus's murder. When much sacrilegious plunder by Lysimachus took place in the city with the consent of Menelaus, and when the report of this spread abroad, the people gathered together against Lysimachus, because many of the gold vessels had already been carried away. Thus, since the crowds were stirring and completely filled with wrath, Lysimachus armed about 3,000 men and began an unjust attack, led by a certain Ar- Aranus, a man advanced in years but no less advanced in stupidity. So, when the Jews became aware of assault of Lysimachus, some picked up stones and clubs, and others took handfuls of ashes lying about and threw them in utter confusion at Lysimachus and his men. As a result, they wounded many of them, killed some, and forced them all to flee. Then they killed the temple robber himself near the treasury. But a judgment concerning this was presented against Menelaus, for when the king arrived at Tyre, 3 men sent by the council of elders presented the case before him. But Menelaus, who was already defeated, promised considerable wealth to Ptolemy, son of Dormenes, if he won over the king. Therefore, Ptolemy took the king aside into a certain courtyard, as if to offer him refreshment, and persuaded him to change his mind. For he indeed acquitted Menelaus, the cause of all the evil, but he sentenced to death those unfortunate men who would have been freed uncondemned, even if they pleaded before Scythians. So those who had spoken for the city, the people, and the holy vessels suffered the unjust penalty. For this reason, even the Tyrians were indignant over the crime and provided magnificently for their funeral expenses. But Menelaus, because of the covetousness of those in power, remained in office, increased in malice, and brought about great treachery against his fellow citizens. Around this time, Antiochus set out his second assault into Egypt. So it came about throughout the entire city of Jerusalem that for almost 40 days there were apparitions of horsemen dressed in apparel interwoven with gold and moving quickly through the air. In companies armed with spears and drawn swords, troops of horsemen set in battle array and making attacks and counterattacks on this side and on that. With the movement of the shields and the multitude of spears and the shooting of arrows and the brightness of gold ornaments and breastplates of all sorts, therefore all men prayed that the appearance might be for the good. Jason's assault on Jerusalem. But when a false report was circulated that Antiochus was dead, Jason took no less than 1,000 men and suddenly made an assault upon the city. When the men on the wall were driven off and the city was finally taken, Menelaus was banished into the citadel. But Jason kept slaughtering his fellow citizens without mercy, not comprehending that success against his kinsmen was his very unlikely day, for he imagined that he was winning trophies over his enemies rather than people of the same race. Yet he did not get the upper hand of the government, but in the end gained disgrace from his plot and took refuge again among the Ammonites. In the end, his life reached an ugly conclusion. He was accused before Aretas, the ruler of the Arabs, but fled from city to city. He was pursued by all, detested as a rebel against the laws, and abhorred as an executioner of his homeland and fellow citizens. Finally, he was cast ashore in Egypt. Thus, he who so often banished many from their homelands himself perished in a strange land, for he had set sail to the Lacedaemonians, Lacedaemonians to obtain protection because of their kinship. So He who cast out many without a burial was unmourned, for he had no funeral of his own, nor did he share a place in the tomb of his fathers. Antiochus kills and desecrates. When the news of what happened reached King Antiochus, he took it to mean that Judea was in revolt. So inwardly he became like a wild beast, left Egypt, and took the city in war. He commanded his soldiers to cut down without mercy whomever they met and to slaughter those who went into their houses. So there was a killing of young and old, a killing of boys, women, and children, and a slaughtering of virgins and infants. 80,000 were destroyed in a total of 3 days, 40,000 in hand-to-hand combat, and no fewer were sold into slavery than were slain. Not satisfied with these things, Antiochus dared to enter the most holy temple in all the earth. He had as his guide Menelaus, who had become a traitor to the laws and to his country. With defiled hands he took the holy vessels, and with profane hands he pulled down the things dedicated by other kings to increase the glory and honor of the place. Antiochus was haughty, but was unaware that because of the sins of those who lived in the city, the Lord was momentarily angered, and therefore was withholding grace as a temporary punishment of the place. However, if the people of the city had not been involved in so many sins, this man would have been scourged and brought to ruin as soon as he had come, as was Heliodorus, when Seleucus the king had sent to inspect the treasury. But the Lord did not choose the nation because of the place, but the place because of the nation. Therefore, the place also itself shared in the misfortunes that befell the nation, and later had a share in its benefits. And what was forsaken in the wrath of the Almighty was restored again in all its glory, and by the reconciliation of the great Lord. At any rate, Antiochus carried off 1,800 talents from the temple and hurried away to Antioch. In his arrogance, he thought he could sail on the land and walk on the sea because of the lifting up of his heart. But he also left governors to afflict the people. In Jerusalem, he left Philip, a Phrygian by race, more barbarous in character than the one who appointed him, and in Gerizim Andronicus. In addition to those, he left Menelaus, who lorded it over his fellow citizens worse than did the others, having a hateful disposition toward the Jewish citizens. Antiochus and Apollonius, commander of the Mysians, with an army of 22,000 men, with orders to slaughter all the grown men and to sell the women and young boys as slaves. After he arrived in Jerusalem and pretended to be peace-loving, this man waited until the holy day of the Sabbath. Then, finding the Jews not to work, he commanded his men to take up arms. He put to the sword all those who came out to see them. Then he rushed into the city with his armed men and killed great numbers of people. But Judas Maccabeus, with about 9 others, withdrew into the desert so as not to share in the defilement. He kept himself and those with him alive in the mountains, as do wild animals, by continually eating food that grew wild. Notes from the previous page. 433, in ancient days, a safe place was provided for the people in certain religious sites. This particular haven is a pagan temple dedicated to the Greek gods. Daphne was a suburb outside of Antioch, Syria. 438, being stripped before being put to death, added to the humiliation. 5.2, 40 days is a biblical number of completion or fullness. The flood lasted 40 days and nights, Genesis 7:12. Jonah declared Nineveh would be destroyed in 40 days, Jonathan 3:4. 5:6. One is reminded of Herod's destruction of the innocent children without mercy at the time of the birth of Jesus, Matthew 2:16 through 18. 5:11. The city here is Jerusalem. 5:15 through 20. Antiochus was permitted by God to carry out this insane desecration of the most holy temple because of the sins of the people. It was not just because Antiochus was bent on destruction, but because the Lord allowed it for the good of his people. Verses 17 and 18. 5:19. Because the Lord chose the nation Israel, the place the temple was located there.